Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you again for our third and final session of what we're calling deliberate parenting. Well, when I look back into my 20s, everything that I believed that was true was true. As in my 20s, it's all true. But when I turned 30, I looked back at some of the things that I thought at 20, and I realized it wasn't true. But now that I'm 30, everything that I believe is true, it is true. Until I became 40, and then I look back, and some of the things weren't quite true. But at 40, it was, well, now that I'm 63, I am absolutely positive that everything that I believe is true is true. Or maybe I just need to doubt my certainty and realize I don't know it all. It's the character trait of humility. And humility comes from the word humus, which means of the earth, not of the heavens. In other words, I am human. I'm not God. And what an important lesson to teach your children. So, again, welcome back to our final and third session of deliberate parenting. It's a new way to look at what I believe is the most important responsibility, parenting, that anyone could have. And as I look at the content over these last couple sessions, I realize that 10 to 20 years ago, I would not have delivered this, and it would not have been needed as much. Because today, our world and our culture is different. Over the last two sessions, we kind of used the three little pigs analogy of building a house of brick, not of straw or sticks. And the first session, we talked about how do we create strong, not fragile, young people. And the second session, we talked about how do we create children or young people that are responsible, not self-absorbed or narcissistic. So now we're going to look at the third brick. How do we create children and how do we raise kids that know they're precious? Not perfect. I recently led one of our Youth Frontier Respect retreats, and there were 250 ninth graders in the room. I was at a local high school. And during one of the breaks, two of the ninth grade young women, they came up to me and talked to me about the pressure and the stresses that they feel from their parents around always getting the best grade, making the team, getting into the top college. They're in ninth grade. And this pressure is actually creating a generation of anxiety-driven perfectionists. What's the cost of perfectionism? It's pretty simple. An unhappy kid. And a kid who is driven by perfection, they can't admit that they make mistakes. They can't accept their flaws or their warts, their humanity. A kid driven by perfection is a know-it-all. They're unable to say they're sorry or ask for forgiveness. They don't try if they can't be the best at something. They can't enjoy a game if they're not winning. And they quit when they start to fail. A kid who thinks they need to be perfect will have a really hard time in life having healthy, loving relationships. Why? Because relationships, as all of us in relationships know, are not perfect. Now, the parenting that creates a kid who needs to be perfect is sometimes done unintentionally, and I would say actually most of the time done unintentionally. I rarely meet a parent that actually says, I will only love you, my son or daughter, unless you win the game. I rarely meet a parent that says to their child, you have to be perfect. But the problem is, it's not necessarily in the message, it's how kids interpret the message. A friend of mine once said, kids are poor interpreters. Well, so how do we look at this, and how is the problem caused of creating kids that feel they need to be perfect? It's parents who praise the outcome, not the effort. When that happens, we unknowingly and perhaps unintentionally sow the seeds of perfectionism. And what I mean by this is this. When we constantly celebrate our kids, and when we constantly praise them when they get an A, that's what they focus on. And that's what they start to obsess with. This is, I believe, part of the damage that is done and part of the danger when we have that mindset that every kid gets a gold medal. Everyone is a winner. The only people in a Little League game who don't believe everyone is a winner are the kids. Now, I want you to fast forward a few years. This kind of outcome-based parenting, it creates teenagers who unravel and lose it when criticism comes their way. Or it creates a young adult who unravels and loses it when they get their first bad grade in college. Or it creates that 24-year-old employee that you work with who can't deal with a less than a 5-star review from their manager. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. It's a keen sense of the obvious. Everything that they've gotten up to that point in their life has been an A, has been a gold medal, has been unbelievable praise about how awesome they are. What I actually like to say is, God help your kid if they feel like they need to be perfect. And God help everyone else if your kid thinks they are perfect. That issue around perfectionism and the focus on being perfect is actually well represented in Carl Jung's work. Carl Jung was a 20th century Swiss psychologist, and Jung focused much of his work on the human shadow. If you're a Star Wars fan, it's the idea of the dark side. And what Jung would talk about is the importance of integrating your shadow and to see oneself as both good and bad, sometimes right and sometimes wrong. And if they aren't able to do that, what they psychologically do is start to project their shadow outward onto others. And that is increasingly dangerous behavior in our society. Why? Because that projection of one's shadow onto others, it starts to internally breed arrogance and a sense of certainty. And I'm not sure if you are feeling this when what you see or hear or maybe read about of what's going on a lot of college campuses. And if you are seeing some of this, maybe this third presentation on precious and perfect can actually give you some words to describe what you might be feeling. And I believe this inability to see oneself as having light and shadow in the Jungian concept is what's the phenomenon that's behind our current cancel culture or the shout down culture that we hear about. We can shout down anyone who disagrees with us or thinks differently than us because I am all good. I am always right. I, at 20 or 30 or 40 or 63, am the holder of the truth. And you people out there, you are always wrong. You are evil. The Pew Research Group recently did some alarming work that showed that in our country today, 42% of people on both political parties, on both sides, view the other side as, quote, downright evil. Really? Now, this is what can happen when we overpraise, and the way I describe it is borderline worship our kids, or believe as a parent that our kids can do no wrong. What we do is we unknowingly and unwittingly teach them that they don't have a shadow. Worshiping our kids versus loving our kids does great damage. Our children have got to know that they have a shadow, and that's okay. We all do. It's the human condition. There is good and bad in all of us. We are sinner and saint, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, said. The line separating good and evil passes through every human heart. Now, how do we create children who know they're precious? Now, first of all, what do I mean by precious? It is not the Lord of the Rings Gollum concept of my precious. It's a young person that can understand that they are precious and they're not perfect. There's a difference. They know that they are loved just because they are, period. No strings attached. They are not loved because they're the best. They're not loved because they're perfect or make the team or get the A. Your love as a parent is unconditional. And you cannot say that enough to your children. From 4 years old to 14 years old. How do parents create a kid that knows they're precious and not perfect? It's parents who praise the effort, not the outcome. And what this sounds like is this. If you get an A and you didn't work hard, I'm not proud of you. I'm not proud of you. I might be happy for you. Yeah, you got an A, but not proud. Versus if you get a B minus, maybe worse, and you worked really hard, I'm proud of you. It's the effort that matters. Carol Dweck, the Stanford psychologist, has worked and explained this really well in her concept of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And growth mindset young people versus fixed mindset young people are healthier in their mental health, around anxiety, around depression, because it's their effort that they have control over. A kid who knows they're precious can admit their mistakes. They can accept their warts and flaws. They know they're human. They can say they're sorry. They can ask for forgiveness. They try their best, and they don't unravel when others are better. They enjoy games. Why? Because they're games. They try harder when they start to fail. They know they don't know it all. And they know they don't have to know it all. The obvious question, what kind of kid do you want in your house? Last week I talked about the importance of creating a home that's a safe base, not a safe space. Your home is a place to pause on the base when they're running the path, to catch their breath, to lick their wounds, to reflect on the mistakes and the choices that they make, to see that they're human, to see the self, to see where they need to grow, and maybe to feel a little bit of healthy guilt. What do I mean by that? Well, I remember, about 10 years ago when my daughter was around 6 years old, and at dinner she was practicing her comedic timing and comedic content at the dinner table, and she said something to my wife Jane that, well, quite frankly, wasn't that funny, and it kind of stung a little bit with my wife. And Tess kind of observed it. And I looked at her and I said, Tess, do you see what you said? You were trying to be funny and it actually hurt your mom. And I could see Tess's eyes kind of open up, and she kind of looked down and she kind of got some tears in her eyes. I said, oh, wow, I see you're sad. I'm glad you're sad, Tess, because that's your conscience saying you hurt someone you love. Now, what I could have done, or what Jane could have done is, oh, don't worry, I know you didn't mean it. But instead, we let her feel a little bit of what we call healthy guilt. Our kids need to understand this. And it's not to beat them with it, but they can understand this, and they can understand it at a very young age. We need to tell our kids they are okay and they're loved if they don't know it all. They are okay and they are loved if they make a mistake in relationships. They are okay and they're loved if they don't win the game or they don't get the best grade. They are okay and they're loved if they don't look a certain way, or if they don't have the following that they see with all these people on TikTok. The life message here, it's pretty simple. Unconditional love. You are loved, not because you're perfect. You are loved and you're precious because you're you. Let me share a few tangible, practical do's and don'ts. Say to your child when they walk out the door every day, even if they roll their eyes, always know that no matter what happens outside of this house, you are loved and you are precious, and nothing can ever change that. Have a great day. Share some stories, appropriate stories, of maybe times that you failed or screwed up when you were a kid, and what you learned from it. Ask the question to your kids when they make mistakes or they stumble, what did you learn? Maybe it's only that you're not perfect. The lesson is we can fail and life still goes on, and life involves growth. Another thing to do when mistakes or problems happen, challenge them. Ask them the question, what did you do to contribute to the problem? That's a critical life skill for anyone in relationship when you're in conflict, in disagreement, from a 17-year-old to a 63-year-old in a marriage. And then lastly, I'll say in my yet to be published parenting book, rule number 4. Sometimes it is your kid's fault. A couple of don'ts. Don't tell your kid you're perfect just the way you are. Nobody is, ever. Maybe even better, take perfect out of your parental vocabulary around the home. Next, don't praise results. When your kid succeeds at something, praise their effort and hard work, because that's connected to their character. What we're going to do, like we did last time, is just for a few minutes, is we're going to break into triads. And what we would like you to talk about is, what is something in this precious or perfect section today that challenged you? And then maybe to share something that you believe could be an additional do or don't with your group that you could add to the list. And if you would put that into the chat box, we love that, because we can continue to build that menu. We'll come back in just 2 minutes.
Coming back.
Thank you. Thank you for showing up today and over the last couple of weeks and thinking about the bricks of character in your parenting practice. These bricks are not the end-all be-all, but I do believe they are incredibly important in today's world. And your kids will need these 3 bricks: strong, responsible, precious, when they face the big bad wolves out there that they're undoubtedly going to encounter on the road of life. Thank you, take care, and be a deliberate parent.